Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Joe here of Paranormal Library. Got quite an interesting one for you today. I will be talking with Jamie Corstorphine, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, of the world-famous City of the Dead tours. I'm not going to go into too much detail about what they do because that's part of the interview. It's going to be interesting. There are two main subject matters as well as the work that they do on a daily basis that we want to talk about today. Jamie, how are you, mate? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
That's perfect, man. I can hear you now. Excellent. How's things?
I'm standing in the Covenanters prison at the moment, behind the gates. So we're locked in. You see the gates behind me.
Right.
So I'm just making my way down to the infamous Black Mausoleum now.
Excellent. You're actually going to do it, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a backup right here. There's no other place to do it. We could certainly do it in the office, but
when you've got a mausoleum, Jamie, go to the mausoleum, you know.
Absolutely.
That's it.
So I'll just turn you around at the moment. We're standing outside the Black Mausoleum right now.
Mm-hmm.
This is where thousands of people have, experienced various things, from the scratches to the burn marks, to the bruise marks, to being knocked out cold.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite a different place as we go to the darkness.
So in terms of City of the Dead tours, Jamie, talk a little bit about what you guys offer.
Well, we're a walking tour company. We started back in 1999 from the author Jan Henderson, and his documentation of the MacKenzie Poltergeist, as it's now known. Jan had been, researching this thing for quite a while, and he decided to put all his findings together in the book. And to do that, he needed access to this area that the council had closed off from the graveyard.
Mm-hmm.
Under lock and key. So after to and swaying with the council, Jan managed to get the keys, the promise he had public liability insurance, and we've been doing tours into the Covenanters prison where there's sole access, and we've been doing it since 1999.
Right, okay.
We bring people in to hopefully they'll get attacked by a poltergeist. That's what everybody wants, isn't it?
Hopefully. So in terms of Greyfriars Kirkyard, before we move on to the more sort of paranormal features of what you do, tell us a little bit about the grounds itself. Why is Greyfriars so famous?
Well, you've got a lot of famous people buried here. It was one of the main graveyards of Edinburgh after St Giles. Graveyard was basically too full.
Mm-hmm.
They needed a land to bury people in. So the old monastery that was here before, Mary Queen of Scots decided to give the land to the people of Edinburgh to be used as a burial ground. So after that, it was the main burial ground for Edinburgh at the time.
Right.
A lot of famous people buried here. A lot of not so famous people buried here. A lot of people who are buried here that shouldn't be buried here, and a lot of people who are not marked that are buried here.
Right. Okay.
The land itself, it used to be a valley when it was first given. It sloped down to where the monastery was.
Okay.
And today it's built up. Greyfriars, like the best way to describe Greyfriars is it is a human lasagna.
Mm-hmm.
It's just stacked upon stacked upon stacked upon stacked upon stacked.
Yeah.
You're never about a foot away from the remains of somebody.
Right. Okay. So I read that somewhere before. Actually, as you said, it's like layer upon layer upon layer. And one very unique thing I noticed when I was walking around is you would see it in churchyards every now and again, but it seemed that every other stone in Greyfriars had the skull and crossbones. Yeah. For people who don't know what that is, what is that symbol? What does that symbolise in this?
That's all it is. It's nothing to do with pirates or slave victims or maintenance. It's a sign of mortality. It's just one of the ways to basically memento morte. Remember, we must die. It's just a commonly used back then for the skull and crossbones, long before they came along with the Jolly Rogers and the pirates and things like that.
And you touched on this earlier on, Jamie. George MacKenzie. You cannot talk about Greyfriars without talking about George MacKenzie. In life, who was this guy? What was his legacy?
Well, George MacKenzie, he started off, he was born in Dundee, he started off in law, and he worked himself up to become King's Advocate, which, is not an easy feat. he'd worked his entire life to get to where he was.
Mm-hmm.
So, he was the lawmaker in Scotland under the king. He was a very, very important person within, the sort of king's court and things like that. And it was a case of, he is unfortunately more famously known for the darker things that he did. I don't necessarily think, to get the nickname Bloody MacKenzie back in the 1600s in Scotland was not an easy thing to do.
No.
It was quite a bloody time.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think he was given the job. He was, at that time as well, you were with the king or you're against the king.
Mm-hmm.
There was no, in between, which was unfortunate. So he was in a position, he'd worked his entire life to get to where he was, to turn around and say, you know what, actually, I think you're wrong here. I think, we should just give them a break, let them, pray how they want to pray. And no, that's not how it worked. He would have been executed. Somebody else would have got the job.
Yeah. Okay.
Some of the things that George MacKenzie never killed anybody with his own hands.
No.
It was orders allegedly from above. He gave the orders. Some of the horrendous things he allegedly did was to take Covenanters out of their, out of their houses and disembowel them and hang them from their own door frames. So when their families came home, they would see their disemboweled fathers, mothers, whoever, as a warning.
Yeah.
But this is all written down. There's obviously history is only written by the winners.
Yeah, very true. Very true. So in terms of the MacKenzie Poltergeist, it's a well-known case. It's the first time I heard it actually was on the back of. Are you familiar with the Sallie House in Kansas in America? The guy moved into a house and he was getting scratched up by an unseen entity, and he was alleging that this was happening on a nightly basis. And then not long after I'd heard about that case, now this was back in the 90s, the next kind of jump out case that I came across was the MacKenzie Poltergeist. So it was almost like, I was really young at the time, but it was almost like, whoa, these spirits are really stepping up. They're not just like howling in the wind and, floating down corridors. Now they're physically attacking you. So the MacKenzie Poltergeist really seared itself into my brain. So in terms of activity connected to the MacKenzie Poltergeist, Jamie, what is being reported?
It's pretty much standard from day one, really. The most common things that are reported to us from people on the tours are scratch marks. Now, these are not like human scratch marks, they're very much like cat scratches.
Right, okay.
They welt up,
okay.
They sort of bump up and they're thin lines.
Mm-hmm.
There's different variants which we purposely don't go into too much detail. So when we get a report through from somebody who's been on the tour, not to say that people make things up, but you do get some people who like to, add info on some things. We want to try and document it as professionally as possible.
Yeah, legitimize it,
everything. Yeah. We want everything to be as credible as possible. So that, there is certain details and certain things that we do keep out of the public. So we know if it is a true, as we class it. I like to call them interactions. Some of the guides will call them attacks.
Yeah.
Interactions sounds a little bit,
It's a little less horrific. Yeah. But so, as well as the scratches you touched on earlier on regarding burns, has there been talk about the burns? That's quite. The only other time I've heard of entities, we will call them entities, burning people is, funnily enough, with the Sallie House in Kansas.
But that's yeah. There is obviously poltergeist activity. It does center around, the spontaneous fires and things like that.
Right. Okay.
It can happen. But these, I wouldn't say they're like third-degree burns or like blister messes and things like that. But they're, it's like almost like a shiny burn. Like if you just graze over a really hot plate or an element in a grill or something like that.
lose contact with it straight away. You get that kind of, as you say, it's kind of shiny. Yeah.
Red shiny kind of burns. It's kind of like that. Or indeed the finger marks as well. The sort of fingerprints that come around people's necks.
Right. Okay.
That's a common thing as well.
Okay, so we've got scratches, burns, and bruising caused by impact. I did read somewhere, and I was never able to verify this, Jamie, so I'm sure you're the guy to ask. There have been reports that I read, at least, as far and as dramatic as people reporting broken bones.
We have had broken bones, yes,
Okay.
but it's not a case that I don't think the poltergeist just comes out and just snaps as I'm standing here with a broken hand.
Is that George?
I could lie to you and say, yeah, George done this, no stupidity. But no, one of the things that does happen, apart from the burns, scratches, is people get knocked out. It's a common occurrence. Not faint. People know they're going to faint. They get dizzy.
Yeah.
They sit down. This is a knockout. It's like a hypnotist has come up and went,
Just
sleep.
Yeah.
And they go.
Okay.
Which, of course, if they land wrong, they break arm. They can break an arm, break an elbow. It has happened. We have had, unfortunately, broken bones on the tour.
So
it is but I can't honestly say it was because of the poltergeist.
Okay. So it'd be more realistic to say that the broken bones would be as an effect of what initially happened. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, part of the sequence that because obviously something has made them drop in the first place.
Yeah.
And then that's the result, depending on how they fall.
Yeah, and where as well, because we're talking about not exactly a modern building, So
exactly.
So when did this begin, Jamie? When was the first sort of documented record of activity that involves George MacKenzie?
Well, sort of early in 1999.
Okay.
That was just after. The story about the homeless man breaking into the MacKenzie's tomb, which this is where people get confused. Unfortunately, there's a lot of tour companies who have adapted the story to suit their own tours,
right? Because
they don't have access to the locked section, the prison that we're in just now. So they have now started calling MacKenzie's Mausoleum. So I've just got a call. They've then called the MacKenzie Mausoleum the Black Mausoleum, because it's Mackenzie's tomb,
right,
and it's black, and it's a mausoleum, and there's been no, attacks, registered there.
Okay.
We are standing in the Black Mausoleum right now.
Okay.
And nobody has access to Mackenzie's Mausoleum. So the first attacks really started around about 1999, after the homeless man broke into Mackenzie's Mausoleum through the back to get shelter, and he made his way down to the burial chamber, which was just an iron grate that you can just lift up. Go down the steps, and that's where the coffins are, where Mackenzie's coffin is, along with two others. And something happened, and he ended up going through the floor, which you can still see to this day, the hole in the floor that goes down. Now, below that is another burial chamber, which unfortunately there are 7 skeletons there from the Foresters. It was the Forester family tomb before it was Mackenzie's tomb. Perfect example of reusing the space.
Yeah.
There's a lot of common stories about that it was a plague pit, things like that. No, it's not a plague pit. Plague victims were not buried within the boundaries of the city.
Okay.
This was within the boundary of the city. There's no plague victims here. It is the burial chamber for 7 of the Foresters' children, going by the book of interments that we've got in the office. Now, that disturbed Mackenzie's coffin. Obviously, he must have grabbed onto it, and it fell, and it broke. It wasn't long after that the first reports of people walking in here in the prison area, which was open to the public. They were coming away during the day, even in the afternoon, with strange feelings, feeling queasy, coming out with strange marks on them.
Right.
Now, the council, obviously, who are not insured for graveyards, they decided, after having meetings, to lock the gates. That was the easiest option, was to just close the gates off and not let anybody have access to it. And that's it. Job done. Now, obviously, they offered Jan and heard about this. Jan decided to look into this further. It was something interesting enough. And that's when he started documenting it. He started speaking to people and getting reports and basically hanging around. And to help document this, this is why he wanted to do tours.
Okay.
What perfect way to have people document it than actually be with them. And that's really, from 1999 onwards, which was 20 years ago now.
So you have this guy. This guy is a historical figure, had an important role. Was probably seen by a lot of people as being quite high society at the time. And then this thing happens in 1999 where ultimately his burial ground gets disturbed. And then all of these strange things start to get reported. One thing that I have to ask you, Jamie, is, do you think it is George MacKenzie that's doing the attacking or the interactions, as you prefer to call them?
I mean, in all honesty, we don't know.
Okay.
We really don't know. It's purely coincidence, really. It just so happened that both times that Mackenzie's tomb has been, desecrated as such, things have heightened up within the prison area. The second time was in 2003, I think it was, off the top of my head, when a young guy broke in, a young 15-year-old broke into Mackenzie's tomb and removed his head from the corpse and was running around the graveyard with it. And after that, it was things started heating up in the prison again on the tours. Okay,
so it seems every time there's some unwanted attention, shall we say, sort of carried out in the tomb, things amplify.
Yeah.
Okay, that's bizarre. Obviously, you've kind of answered my next question already. In terms of the physical evidence aside, the scratches, the burns, the bruising, what other evidence have you received or captured that does suggest that, no, it is George MacKenzie?
I mean, well, there is nothing really. It is just, I wouldn't say speculation. It's just, it feels right. And there has been, obviously we've had a lot of mediums in over time, over the years. And, a few of them have said that it is. A few of them have come up with other names. And, because we haven't got a connection between this tomb and Mackenzie. George was put there in 1691. This is much later. And this is the Dundas of Fingask tomb. So, there's no connection there that we could find so far. So it's still a 50-50. We're really, really not sure. We can't positively say it's definitely George MacKenzie.
But it seems a bit of a great coincidence. It seems a bit of a coincidence that every time someone messes with that site, things tend to amplify. Yeah. Okay. In terms of City of the Dead staff, obviously tourists are generally the focal point of the interactions and the attacks. What about you guys? What about the City of the Dead staff? What have you experienced?
Unfortunately, me, I've not really subscribed to anything. I'm a bit of psychic as the gate that's holding this place closed.
Okay.
But other guides, certainly. I mean, we've had guides getting knocked out on tour. We've had guides coming away with scratches. We've had a lot of injuries to guides as well, burn marks. The guides have experienced it as much as obviously, we're putting ourselves right in the heart of it night after night. So we are putting ourselves in the position. It just seems that it likes some, it doesn't like others. Okay. But again, it's not a performing monkey.
No.
Whatever it is, it does what it wants. We know it's definitely not human.
Right. Okay. So the vaults. Now, for a lot of the listeners and people who are watching this, a lot of them will be from America, so they may not be familiar with what we're talking about here. But the vaults essentially is, correct me if I'm wrong, it was the original Edinburgh, and then the newer Edinburgh was built on top.
No,
Correct
that's
me. Go ahead.
More Mary King's Close.
Okay.
Mary King's Close is part of an old street that's now basically underground because it's acting as foundations for the building above it. There is no such thing as an underground city in Edinburgh. There's various different things that have been used basically because we're Scottish. Let's face it, we don't like spending money. So if we can reuse something, we will reuse it and utilise it as much as we can.
Okay.
So, for instance, Mary King's Close, it is acting as foundations for the Royal Exchange, which is now City Chambers. Above it, that's when it became buried. The vaults, they're completely man-made, and they're part of South Bridge. South Bridge is a massive 19-arched viaduct structure. It was built between 1785 and 88. Now, at that time, the Cowgate area of Edinburgh had become a massive slum. It had its own problems. The poorest of the poor, it was downtrodden. So instead of the council spending money and redoing this lovely area to match in with the new town that was getting built, to put access to the south side of the city, and the university at the time, obviously, we were taking off in medicine, technology, design, architecture. People from all over the world were coming to Edinburgh. We're called the Athens of the North. It was the Enlightenment period. But the Cowgate was a complete slum.
Right.
So they had a choice. Clear the Cowgate, making access to the university in the south side of the city, opening up the streets. Or we could do the cheaper option of building a bridge over the top.
Right. Okay.
South Bridge was born.
Yeah.
And basically it was an extension of the High Street. So you had high society on South Bridge, 42 feet above the Cowgate. And basically you had the slums of the Cowgate below. This was a thoroughfare to the south side. And they were left. So the bridge basically went over the top, and it was designed to have obviously shops and things on it.
Okay.
The bridge itself, although it was over 1,078 feet in length, it is a massive, massive structure. The only one arch you can see is the Cowgate arch with traffic going under it. The other 18 are sealed behind the tenements.
Right.
If you imagine a straight line and get 4 blocks and put 2 on each side and push them towards the line, that's exactly what South Bridge is. The tenement building that basically had the shops in it, level 4, bridge level. They concealed the arches. And what they did is they ran corridors down both sides and they interlinked them, because these arches were then turned into vaulted chambers. They were going to rent them out to the businesses to use for basically workshops, or storage space. This extra money that they would charge the businesses, that would then pay for the upkeep of the bridge. It's a great idea, brilliant idea, if it had worked. However, in Scotland, I don't know how, we can say tight-arsed, can't we?
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
We are very tight-arsed. So we decided when we built this bridge to try and cut corners, keep costs down. We decided not to use puddling clay when building the South Bridge. When puddling clay is mixed with limestone mortar, it creates a barrier for rain and waterproof. South Bridge was never waterproof because it never rains in Edinburgh, does it? Really?
No, of course not, no.
So, from day one, the water sat on the surface and it just seeped through. Came through the bricks, it rendered the vaults useless for the businesses. They couldn't work in them because they were dark and now damp. And you couldn't keep stocking them because of the dampness.
Sure.
They were abandoned. And that was really the first sort of stage after the vaults had finished what they were meant to do. The first businesses started abandoning the vaults in about 1792, which is a bit mad because the last tenement wasn't finished completion until about 1795, 96. So they were moving out before the bridge was even fully completed. I mean, the bridge itself was opened in 1788 to cross, but the tenements were an ongoing thing. And after that, you had basically the legal trades moving in, using the vaults. It was an underground warren of tunnels and chambers.
Yeah.
It was when it was first built. I mean, it would have been absolutely amazing to witness the sheer scale size.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
I mean, the engineering logistics alone would have been huge, unimaginable at the time.
Monumental feat of engineering for its time.
But as you said,
in fact, there was own problems too. When building it, I mean, inside the brickwork is phenomenal.
Yeah, and as you said, when the sort of economic uses sort of fell to the wayside, that's when the poor started to move in, and then the criminal element started to move in, and then with that comes disease and all kinds of horrible things. So in terms of the vaults and the reported paranormal activity, Jamie, what has been reported?
I mean, pretty much, funnily enough, pretty much the same, not to the same extent, or as frequent, I would like to say, than in the graveyard. But I mean, there is something in there again that's not, it's not human. It does like to interact.
Yeah.
A lot of shadows, a lot of lights, I mean, I'm not a fan of orbs. To me, it could be light anomalies in the air and things like that. I mean, there's a lot of dust out there.
I completely agree. Yeah.
But I mean, certainly EVPs that have been thrown up are interesting.
Okay.
When we had, some investigators coming in, we used to do that. We had a lot of them coming in, and scratches are common. Again, the knockouts are more frequent in the vaults than they are in the graveyard, though.
Right. Okay.
So that's something slightly variant different.
So you talk about scratches. Who is Mr. Boots? I hear this name all of the time.
That is, he's been spotted in Blair Street Vaults. There's 3 different sections of vaults available at tour companies.
Yeah.
You have Old Reekie Tours. They have Nidri Street Vaults.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Mercat Tours. They've got Blair Street Vaults. And you have our tour vaults, which are Nidri Street South Vaults. All 3 different vault sections are completely different layouts to each other.
Yeah.
Obviously, the way we do things are different. But, they are all different in certain elements. And, of course, things are felt differently as well from different sections. There's quite a distance between us. But I believe Mr. Boots, Mr. Boots has been felt numerous times, and I believe heard in Blair Street Vaults, with Mercat Tours, who are extremely good at what they do, by the way.
I hear, obviously, in terms of reports from Mr. Boots, and I won't carry on too much because obviously it's not the vault that you specialise in, but he tends to get very aggressive towards women in particular.
I believe so, yeah. It's been reported that, he doesn't like women at all, and it seems to be, Yeah, it's... Again, we have incidents in here as well where we can have frequencies of, maybe 5-6 females in a row with interactions with us, but then suddenly there's 2 males, and then it could go back to 4 females, then 6 males, then 4 females in 6, or even, I think the most we've had one night interactions has been 6 people, different people in one tour.
Right, wow.
All being interacted with simultaneously.
Right, okay. And when you say interacted with, what sort of things are we talking about?
The scratches and things.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, I don't say attacked, it's very crazy, We do like to bring people with us in here sometimes.
Another famous account, and I'm not sure, Jamie, whether this is your vault that we're talking about here, but it's the room where there's supposedly the spirit of a child that resides there, and people from... that's Mary King's Close. Oh, right, okay.
Having said that, though, there has been a little boy felt in our vaults by about, I think it was at least 4 different mediums who don't know each other. There's different times, there were different areas, in different years they came in, and they all sensed a little boy in our vaults called Jack. In one of our 2 vaults upstairs. So we have had, the little boy used to go for blonde-haired women. He used to feel it. A lot of women reported feeling him in the hand. It was like a coldness.
Oh, like is it almost...
Yeah, almost like he was taking... Allegedly, the little boy was looking for his mum. He wasn't aware that he'd passed over. And he'd been doing this for 250 years.
Right, okay.
But his mum obviously was blonde. And any blonde female that he was come in contact with, it was almost like if you've got a dog or something, you're in the kitchen and it brushes up against the back of your legs. Yeah. It's not... seemingly, it wasn't a horrible feeling. Yeah. They weren't made to feel uncomfortable. It was just like a very cold bit, and he would try and take their hand, and then he would just vanish.
And then, right, okay, and then obviously people's reaction to that is more of an inquisitive, oh, what was that, as opposed to scream and run,
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah, so obviously, as we've discussed there, Jamie, there are varying degrees and reports of activity coming from the vaults. In your theory, Jamie, what do you think it is about Greyfriars and the vaults that is causing, or at least containing, this, let's say, amplified activity?
I mean, I think the history alone, although the graveyard obviously has got a lot more history than the vaults, and a lot more, you see, graveyards don't tend to be haunted. People are already, passed over by the time they get here.
Yeah.
So, very rarely, this whole, stereotypical graveyard with a haunted mansion in the background and the bats flying around. Graveyards are very, very peaceful places. My wife's a death historian. So, we spend a lot of time in graveyards, and, it is like a second home, and a lot of them are very peaceful. The Greyfriars is different. Allegedly, going back to George MacKenzie, not to mention the fact that 800 people lost their lives in the area that we're standing in right now because of what they believed in. That doesn't happen in normal graveyards.
No.
The fact is the history, the turbulence that was caused at the time, and allegedly the curse that was put on George MacKenzie's body. Now, this is just alleged. We don't know if it's true or not, but seemingly there was a curse put on MacKenzie's body that said his soul would never rest as long as it was in Greyfriars. Because of the atrocities that he was responsible for. and then the young men and women and children who lost their lives because of, his orders.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always that side of it as well. That could explain certainly why Greyfriars is so active,
Okay.
in particular this area.
Mm-hmm.
The vaults, again, a lot of people lost their life in the vaults through cholera,
Yep.
through dysentery, typhoid, and these people should never have been in there. The local authorities could have got them out. They could have put them in temporary accommodation, but they chose to do nothing. Out of sight, out of mind. And hundreds of people lost their lives in the vaults for no reason at all. And, if there was such a thing as the stone tape recording theory, that could certainly explain why so much energy is being kept in the bricks.
I was just about to actually comment on that, Jamie, about the stone tape theory. It's kind of, if you were going to use an example of the stone tape theory and explain how it works, Greyfriars would be the ultimate example, because look around you and there's stone, literal stone everywhere. And obviously the same with the vaults. But obviously there's an element within both areas where there's an intelligence at work as well. So, yes, I agree that the stone tape theory is probably at work to a degree. But obviously, as you've said yourself, there's an intelligence at work at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, the stone tape theory doesn't account for the scratches. It doesn't account for, certainly shadows and things like that. Obviously, the stone tape theory is just recording of a playback of the sort of the sad energy, if you wish.
Yeah.
Whereas the attacks are different. That is when it becomes a poltergeist.
Yeah, that's not a memory. That's not a memory. That's not a replay. That's something that's honed in on you and is coming at you. For the staff of City of the Dead tours, Jamie, obviously you mentioned earlier on that you're in the heart of it all of the time. Has that had any knock-on effect in terms of with being there on such a regular basis? Do you find that interactions or let's just say interactions are more frequent for you guys because you're there all of the time, or has your presence there kind of deadened the senses, so to speak?
I think actually that's a good point. I think it could be a 50-50.
Okay.
There's a certain element of, I don't think we get used to it because it's so spontaneous.
Mm-hmm.
But if we go in doing a tour expecting it to happen, so it's kind of like the whole air hostess thing, They're told and trained, no matter what's happening, you keep a nice smile on your face and keep everybody calm.
Yeah.
The last thing we need when something kicks off, I mean, you can imagine if something kicks off, everybody goes crazy. And that's when people can get hurt.
Yeah.
People bang into each other, they knock over. So if we can try and keep an eye, so we go in expecting something to happen, so we're ready for it.
Yeah.
But even having said that, we can never be ready for it because we just don't know what's going to happen or when.
It's so sporadic and, as we've said, varying degrees of interaction. You could be, emotionally armoured to the teeth waiting for something to happen, and the most that happens is a brick gets thrown, and then sometimes you can be in that same state of mind, and the next thing someone just, is knocked out and lands on the floor. You can't predict it. You cannot predict it. There's no way of doing it. Well, Jamie, I think we've covered absolutely everything that I wanted to discuss today. Correct me if I'm wrong. If anyone's in Edinburgh and they want to book a tour with City of the Dead, it's cityofthedeadtours.com. Yep, so check that website out, guys. If you're ever in Edinburgh, I would more than recommend going to Greyfriars, having a look around, and certainly booking a tour with you guys. Because, and let me say this, Jamie, you know your stuff, man. You are an encyclopedia of that place. I'm very impressed with you just know these things. You just know them. It's impressive.
I do. I've always said I don't do this for the money. I do it because I love doing it, and it's a different job, that's for sure. But it's one that you could never ever get bored of.
No, I don't imagine you would.
It's different every day.
Well,
and I get to kill people and bury them in the graveyard
as a hobby, as a side thing. So what I'll say, Jamie, is I'll say my goodbyes now. I'll be in touch in the future, I've no doubt. I'm in Edinburgh fairly frequently, so I'll come and see you next time I'm over. And listen, man, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Fantastic,
Jamie. Take it easy, mate.
You too, buddy. Thank
Bye
you.
bye.